For 7 years, I have been dreading this day, and with each passing year, my hope that it would never come has grown. But today it became a reality. It was the worst day of my life, even though it was a normal, sunny Tuesday in May. The day started out almost as usual, and if it hadn't been for a forgotten wristwatch, I never would have known how important this day would turn out to be for me. Of course, I knew the risks, and I couldn't deny that many people had warned me not to do what I had done 7 years ago. I knew I would hear many times now that I should have heeded their warnings. But I didn't listen, and I will never regret not doing so. I will never forget how everything went wrong and how my world began to crumble. I was already dressed and standing in the kitchen making breakfast when I noticed my watch was still in the bedroom and went back there to retrieve it. My beautiful common-law wife, Alexandra, was already out of bed and getting dressed. To my surprise, I noticed that she had put on a sexy new lace bra when she came into the kitchen a short time later. She was even wearing a slightly shorter skirt than she usually wore to work and more makeup than usual. She worked in the marketing department of the steel industry, which completely dominated our small Scandinavian town, and she hardly needed erotic lingerie to work there. When I asked her the reason for this outfit and whether she was going on a date with some man, she had a frightened expression on her face for a split second, after which she started screaming and accusing me of being crazy. I answered her without raising my voice. It doesn't matter whether I'm crazy or not. The consequences of cheating will be the same. I can't stop you from doing it, but I will kick you out when you do. I was sure I wasn't crazy because it was obvious to me how Alexandra had started to change her behavior little by little a few weeks after Bench came to our city and got a job in the same department as her. He was a former national team soccer player who had even spent a year as a professional player at one of the best clubs in the English Premier League and earned good money there, although he spent most of his time on the bench next to the field. He came to our city a few years after a knee injury ended his career as a player. Because of his enduring fame and communication skills, he was hired by the steel company where Alexandra worked as a public relations and marketing specialist. However, the people of our town realized pretty quickly that this guy was a bragging asshole, so they gave him a new local nickname, Bench, which infuriated him. No one could deny that Bench was a good-looking guy, and few were surprised when word spread around town that his swanky BMW M5, the only one in the area, had been seen several times outside the most inconspicuous room at the Junction Motel, located 20 kilometers outside of town. Celebrities have their groupies, and I knew a lot of guys were jealous of him. I expected serious problems with this guy because I was 100% sure that he was working hard on Alexandra and had probably already had some success with her. Alexandra and I had a serious argument over the rumors about Bench going after girls just a week before the day she dressed particularly attractively for work. I let her know that I wasn't stupid enough not to realize that a beautiful wife like her would be one of his preferred targets in his hunt for girls in the office. To avoid possible misunderstandings in the future, I told her what I would do if she was unwilling or unable to resist his attempts. The change in Alexandra's behavior toward Bench gradually developed into a kind of admiration, although she hardly noticed it herself. Her behavior made it clear to me that Bench had an advantage over me in understanding what Alexandra really wanted. To cheat or not to cheat? Or, in other words, did she want wonderful moments of arousal with a known lover? Or marriage and a family with a faithful man? She was not stupid, and I'm sure she gave it serious thought before deciding what to do. In my humble opinion, I did everything I could to save our relationship and keep the family together. I talked to her about the problem and did my best to be the perfect, loving husband. What else could I have done? However, if my efforts were not enough to keep my wife faithful, I vowed that I would never allow a single careless second to turn me into a laughingstock among my friends and acquaintances. I had some simple plans for what to do if the expected problems arose, and I kept some equipment in the car in case I got the clues I needed. Despite all the rumors about Bench, his adventures were taking place at the same motel about 20 kilometers from our town, so I was counting on his and Alexandra's date taking place there as well. If she got him a ride, I was sure they wouldn't dare to meet at my house or his. Therefore, this motel became the main target of my plans the very day I saw Alexandra's new underwear. I had a strange feeling in my stomach all day, so I called her at work at 1 o'clock and was told that she had taken the day off, which meant springing into action for me. My foreman, Kent, was involved in my plan, so I borrowed his Ford Focus, grabbed a bag of useful items from the car, and headed for the Crossroads Motel. On the way, I called Alexandra's cell phone. We had agreed that I would only call her cell phone if I needed to talk to her during business hours. After a while, she answered, and her voice sounded a little strained. Alexandra. Hello, darling. Am I bothering you? Am I doing something special? No, nothing special. Just working as usual in my office. Yes, of course. Where else? What do you need? I was going to tell you that I have to work at least an hour overtime and ask you to pick up the kids from daycare, but I happened to call your office and was told you took the day off. Where the hell are you? And what the hell are you doing? She was a smart girl and immediately spat out a response. But she couldn't help herself. What the hell is wrong with you? Why such a stupid reaction? After all, Sandra and I are buying a surprise for your birthday. Don't blame me now if you guessed your birthday surprise. I gave her another chance to speak and said, I really hope you told me the truth, because if you're cheating on me with that damn bench or any other guy, your ass will be kicked out of my house. Do you understand? Don't be such a jealous maniac. Just relax. I'll pick up the kids from daycare. I wonder how well she felt after that call and whether she told her lover, most likely Bench, about what I had promised to do to him. It must have cooled their ardor, at least temporarily. When I arrived at the motel, I parked in a secluded spot some distance away, dressed in white overalls, a white baseball cap, and dark glasses, and went to room 8 of the motel, where I found Alexandra's blue Corolla next to Bench's black BMW M5. I used a large knife to slash all 4 tires on both cars. I then wrote whore in yellow spray paint on the front doors of Alexandra's car and sex buyer on both sides of Bench's expensive black BMW. By my reckoning, the whole operation took about a minute. As far as I could tell, no one saw what I did. However, I expected the photo to cause rumors because buying sex is against the laws of this country, but selling sex is legal. Stealthily sneaking back into the woods, I took off my coveralls, cap, and sunglasses, threw everything in my bag, and put it in Kent's Focus. I then called Kent on my prepaid cell phone and asked him to take my company Nissan King cab and meet me on the road halfway to the motel. I then called Bench's wife, Camille, at her work and told her who I was, explaining that I had gotten a call that my wife and her husband had rented a room at the Junction Motel. I told her I would get there as soon as I could. Next, I called the local newspaper and the preacher of a new religious sect eager for publicity. Kent and I met 100 yards from the hotel on a forest road, not visible from the main highway. After switching cars, Kent parked so he could see the main road, and a few minutes later, he honked when Bench's wife Camille's red Renault Megane drove by. I drove on for another 5 minutes before following her, now in my Nissan King cab with very prominent company logos. When I pulled up to the motel, a small crowd had gathered, looking at the damaged cars and discussing what had happened. None of the participants could be seen, but one of the spectators told me that there were some people in the room. I entered, and the first thing I saw was a used bed. Then, I noticed Bench and his wife sitting on the couch, yelling at each other. At first, I didn't see Alexandra, but then I heard sounds from the bathroom and found her crying inside. They were waiting for the police, who had forbidden car owners from doing anything to their vehicles until a patrol arrived to investigate. I took some cell phone pictures of the used bed and the room before heading outside to photograph the cars. Much to my delight, a reporter from the local paper had also arrived, taking pictures. Probably because Bench was a well-known character in our town. Sure, they had disguised the license plates, but since his BMW was the only M5 in town, most people knew whose expensive extender was involved in the scandal. The reporter and I were once acquainted, and he asked me if I knew who owned the Corolla. I told him the brutal truth, that it was my soon-to-be ex-wife's. When I arrived, rumors among passers-by suggested that some religious sect was behind it, punishing sinners. I went back to the room and told a sobbing Alexandra that as soon as she received a business letter from the motel, she could come to my house and start packing. Some say that rumors spread as fast as lightning. I doubt that, but within minutes, 3 people from a new religious sect showed up. One of them seemed to be the leader or preacher, speaking in a loud voice about punished sinners. Then, A police patrol arrived, two young men, about 25 years old. What could they do? Nothing but take some pictures and talk to Alexandra and Bench, who claimed to know nothing because they were busy when it happened. The preacher told the policeman that it was the good Lord punishing sinners. When one of the officers asked if he or his friends had anything to do with it, he, to my surprise, neither confirmed nor denied it. Instead, he said that the good Lord would sooner or later punish all sinners on this earth. When he began explaining to the two policemen what they had to do to be saved, they gave up and left. It wasn't my place to fix Alexandra's car, so I left the motel. Back at work, I noted that although my mission had been successful, it was impossible to concentrate on anything else on this horrible day, for me and my children. I couldn't think of a single reason to continue working, so on the way home, I bought 10 cardboard boxes for Alexandra to pack her things. Alexandra arrived home around 6 o'clock in a cab and tried to explain that a cult had attacked innocent people and that things weren't what they seemed at the motel. Since she seemed ready to justify herself, I tried my best to be polite and told her to skip the bullshit and start packing. She started crying and sobbing. "Please forgive me. I made a terrible mistake." "No, you didn't. You planned all this shit, and you can't deny that you knew full well what would happen if you continued to cheat. Even though I warned you this morning and even when you were at the motel. If you'd gotten out of the motel right after that phone call, I wouldn't have gotten any proof. But you didn't care. Probably because you've done it more than once before." No. Today was the first time. And I can promise you it was the last time. The first or 10th time doesn't matter anymore. But I can agree that it was the last time you cheated on me. That's for sure. Alexandra is by no means stupid, so it was a mystery to me why she continued to cheat, even though she knew that her overly revealing outfits and our arguments over breakfast had already made me suspicious. Alexandra must have realized that Bench had no intention of leaving his beautiful trophy wife for her. Somehow, though, he must be a very convincing character, perhaps a psychopath, to make Alexandra fall in love with him, or at least admire him enough to believe all the nonsense he was feeding her. That night, I couldn't stay home, so I took a cab to the most popular bar in town. To my great delight, I noticed that the main topic of the day's gossip was what some sect had done to Bench's expensive car at the motel. The old saying goes, if a lie is repeated enough times, it will come to be regarded as truth. This trick is used by many politicians and is apparently very effective, because no one in the bar suspected the deceived husband of damaging the car. The cult representatives never denied these rumors. In fact, they got much more publicity from what they didn't do than from what they did. As I mentioned, this story began 6 years ago when Alexandra, Philip Moline, and I had our first serious conversation as loners on the dance floor of the only hotel in our small Scandinavian town. She was a tall, slender blonde of Nordic beauty, known as a cool party girl who never stuck with a guy long enough to get bored of him. I, on the other hand, was the complete opposite, a regular, hardworking guy, owner of a slowly growing and fairly successful small company. That night was my first bachelor night after ending a 2-year relationship. Sure, I had dated Alexandra many times over the years, but I had been faithful to my girlfriends, so I made no attempt to woo her. During our first slow dance, she asked me why she hadn't seen me there before, and I told her the simple truth, that my ex never liked the place and that's why we weren't there. To my surprise, she asked if we could have a drink and talk a bit. I got us drinks and we sat down in a booth. Alexandra asked about my ex, and I told her the truth. She worked as a nurse's aide but wanted to become a nurse, which took her 3.5 years of study. The main problem was that the only nursing school she had a chance of getting into was far up north. This meant both advantages and disadvantages for her. Expensive plane or train tickets limited her ability to come home more than a few times a year. The big plus of the northern region, however, was the many opportunities to earn extra money by working as a nurse's aide or, later, as a nurse on weekends and holidays. We concluded that it was impossible to maintain our relationship under such circumstances and decided to part as friends. Alexandra then told me about her own problems. Although she was single, her last boyfriend had left her after some misunderstanding. She couldn't get her own apartment, even though she had a fairly well-paying job, because the bailiff was pursuing her for a large debt that all property owners could see in the public registry. She asked me how I lived, And when I said I had a one-bedroom apartment in a good neighborhood, she made an offer. She wanted to rent a room for a while until she could set up something of her own. She promised to pay fair rent and not bring friends to my apartment, though she never said a word about sex. I was just an ordinary man who saw an unexpectedly great opportunity to use this girl, so after a little internal debate, I accepted her offer. To my great surprise, I discovered pretty soon that Alexandra, known mostly as a party girl, had a lot of unexpected qualities. Within 2 weeks, she had already taken over the kitchen, keeping it clean and organized far better than my ex had ever done. She then organized us to work together to prepare breakfast and other meals. I liked her a lot at first, but I must admit, it didn't take long before I started to fall in love with her. Our relationship developed in a positive way, and I suggested we have dinner on Saturday night. She agreed, and we had a very romantic dinner soon after that. We ended up in my bed, and from that point on, we were a happy couple. We went to parties with friends quite often until a year passed. Alexandra told me that she was tired of this life and wanted a family. Because of her debts to the bailiff, we couldn't get married yet, but I promised her a fancy wedding once she and her ex settled their old affairs. She didn't mind because, in our legal system, civil unions are equal to real marriages for a number of legal issues. After some hesitation, I agreed to start a family, and a period of intense lovemaking led to her first pregnancy and the birth of an adorable baby girl. We became a family, a happy family, although several of my friends warned me against getting too serious with a party girl who was used to short relationships. Of course, I ignored all those warnings. When our young daughter, Lena, was 6 months old, Alexandra started talking about wanting another child and the benefits of having a second child soon after the first. A few days before Lena's first birthday, Alexandra informed me that the tests came back positive. Our daughter was born again, and we decided to name her Nellie. 2 young children required a lot of worrying, but we managed without fighting. My business was growing, and I was able to afford to buy a nice house. Alexandra stayed at home until Nellie was 2 years old. Then she went back to her old job and all was well. I was both proud and happy that, for the next 2 years, almost everything went on as normal. Alexandra started thinking about our big wedding, and almost every month, she had a new idea. She was doing well at her job. She had been promoted, which meant she had to travel, but I don't think she got into anything unpleasant during business trips and conferences. Things were still good when Bench was hired by a steel company as a public relations and marketing specialist, a sort of door opener at client entertainment events, usually taking important clients to soccer games involving our national team. At the beginning of their rather limited collaboration, Alexandra had the same opinion of him as most of the other employees of the company and of our small town. She told me what a bragging zero he really was and how unfortunate it was that his only qualification for a high-paying position was running after a leather ball on the lawn. During PR missions, Bench was usually assisted by several other people of varying degrees of importance from the marketing department, depending on which clients were invited and where. Once, even Alexandra was asked to help out during a day trip to a soccer match involving 2 of the best teams in our country's first division. I still don't believe anything happened between her and Bench during that trip, but I doubt she herself noticed how much her opinion of the asshole changed shortly afterward. Instead of the usual sour comments about his bragging, she started telling me about his exclusive BMW, which had an electronic speed limit of 250 kilometers per hour but could do much more. He showed her how easily the car accelerated to 200 kilometers per hour. Then I began to notice her slight but noticeable signs of a lifestyle change. A little more interest in dressing nicely for work, a little more time for makeup in the morning, and a little more attention to her hair. But at the same time, she started paying a little less attention to our children and family matters. When she almost missed getting ready for the big wedding, I realized that she was bored with family life and clearly wanted to be a delightful and well-groomed party girl again. Only a miracle could have saved our family under these circumstances. I don't believe in miracles, so I asked her, "Dear Alexandra, I don't think I'm blind or stupid, and I've noticed that you're starting to feel uncomfortable with me and the girls. You don't belong to me, and if you really believe that the grass is greener on the other side of the fence, of course, you are free to find your Shangri-La elsewhere. But it would be very nice if we parted as friends before either of us became the cause of hatred and betrayal." After thinking for a while, she replied, "You are wrong, completely wrong. And if either of us is thinking of cheating, it is not me, because I love my family and would never leave you. For a while after that, her interest in her family increased again. But just as I had feared, our family's happiness was shattered at the motel. In the local paper, there was a large picture of painted cars with flat tires. Soon, everyone in town knew who they belonged to, and the worst false rumors said he even indulged in paying customers. When several horny girls started calling Alexandra at work and asking for escorts, her boss got fed up and demanded she take 2 weeks off. The bench had gotten a real share of the attention as a famous former sports star. The national tabloids couldn't resist trying to describe his role in what they called the sex scandal that shook a sleeping city. Though, in reality, most people laughed at Bench and said the braggadocious asshole got what he deserved. Even Bench was asked to take time off because a sexy client was not at all what a serious company, working to enhance its reputation among a privileged clientele, needed. I had to rent an apartment for Alexandra before I checked her out of my house and even vouched for her rent. But at the end of the day, she was still the mother of my children, and I couldn't deny that I still had warm feelings for her. Our separation was hard on me, very hard, and, for a while, I almost turned into a wreck. Had we lived in a big city, where most people don't know their neighbors and don't care about them, perhaps, after some serious hassle and counseling, we might have been able to continue our relationship. But that was out of the question in a small town, where everyone knows each other, and a man who took back a cheating wife was shunned like a jumper in ancient Rome. Bench's beautiful trophy wife, Camille, filed for divorce while he was away, and when he returned, his belongings were packed in cardboard boxes in the garage. He flew into a rage and hit her, but that's when neighbors intervened and called the police, who detained him overnight. A new story in the tabloids. One of Alexandra's best friends said that Alexandra must still have some feelings for Bench because she contacted him, offering to share Alexandra's apartment. But he replied, "You must be crazy if you think I'm going to live together with a freaking cheater." Alexandra cried all night when she realized that the asshole had only used her as a thing, persuading her to cheat on her beloved husband and pay a high price to get nothing but shame from their affair. The next chapter in this sad story came just a few days later when Bench was robbed, brutally beaten, and kicked. To my great fortune, I was bowling with some friends that night, and after the game we stayed home and had a few beers. I was the first person suspected of what happened to Bench. I had no idea what had happened to him when 2 police officers came to my work early in the morning and started questioning me about what I had done the night before. I told them the truth about my bowling trip and the names of the guys who were there with me. When they gave me the reason for their visit, I told them the truth. I'll never regret what happened to that damn asshole. Even Alexandra was visited by the police, but she knew nothing about what had happened to Bench. She was in her apartment with our kids. In a small town, people help each other when they get in trouble, and whoever punished Bench had no reason to brag about it in public. To my surprise, I got a call at work from Bench's ex-wife, Camille, who wanted to meet me. I agreed, and we met on Saturday at an outdoor cafe in the park. Her reputation said she was a spoiled rich daddy's daughter who made a fine trophy wife for her famous husband in his heyday. She was still a very beautiful and stylish woman who worked part-time in a law office in our town. She came to our meeting with her young son, Elliot. I hadn't seen Camille since we met for a few minutes in a motel room during a crush. After some pleasant small talk, she asked me about Alexandra and me. I told her the truth, that we had taken different paths but cooperated quite well on matters concerning the children. She told me that she had left her husband. She then inquired how much I knew about what happened with her soon-to-be ex-husband. I again told the truth, that I had spent the entire evening bowling and drinking beer with friends and didn't know anything about him until the next day when the police told me what had happened to him and asked me some questions. Camille surprised me by saying that if I had anything to do with it, she wanted to thank me because her husband had been a real creep towards her, and Alexandra wasn't his first cheating. I told her I had no idea who had done it. It could well have been the husband of one of his other victims or some citizen who felt sorry for the children, her, Alexandra, or me. We ended our meeting with me promising to help her with her chores the next day. It took me about 2 hours to sort through the stuff in her house, which she intended to put up for sale. When I waived the fee, she invited me to stay for lunch. I was beginning to like her, so I asked her if she wanted to see my daughters the following week. I suggested a picnic at the castle ruins on the lake, a beautiful and very popular picnic spot in good weather. Wednesday evening was perfect picnic weather, and we all had a wonderful time. To my great joy, Camille invited us to have dinner at her house on Friday night. The dinner was a great success, and she suggested we stay the night in her spare room so we could have some wine after the kids were asleep. We did so and spent a very pleasant evening together. She had a lot of questions about Alexandra, how we met, whether I cheated on her or if I hit her during our fights. I told her the truth, that we didn't fight much and that we were planning a big wedding. I would never take Alexandra back, but I wanted to keep an honest relationship with her for the sake of our children. When she asked about my plans for the future, I said that I had no plans, but if fate brought me together with someone who could fall in love with a guy like me, and I with her, I would do my best to be good for her. Camille then told me about herself and her marriage. Her parents never liked her husband, whose newly rich and boastful behavior was very vulgar from their point of view on how wealth should be taken care of. At first, Camille was the wife of a famous sports star and received many invitations to all sorts of events. But then it all went downhill when she became pregnant with their child and couldn't attend all the parties and events they were invited to. She told me that her own experiences had taught her that money couldn't buy true love. She looked me straight in the eye and told me that if our former spouses decided to live together, she was sure that Alexandra would realize very soon that she was a big loser. I replied to Camille that this would never happen because her ex had already told Alexandra that he would never want to live together with such a girl who cheats on her spouse. So much for the love story that destroyed two families. Even Camille did not make any plans for the future. She intended to sell everything she owned with her ex and split the money with him because he had almost nothing left of the big money he made as a highly paid professional soccer player. He had squandered it on silly ventures and expensive toys, like a BMW that he could now barely afford to insure. Camille was very happy because he didn't want to share the money when they got married, and when he started having economic problems, she rejected all his suggestions about it. Camille was free of him because he didn't demand joint custody of their son. She liked her job in this town and was going to stay here for a while. Then she looked me straight in the eye and said, "I hope fate will allow me to find true love." We chatted sweetly until almost 3 o'clock in the morning, and then, embracing each other tenderly, we said good night. When, at about 9 o'clock, I had just dressed and was still in Camille's spare room, I heard some shouting and loud voices outside the house. Of course, I got curious and went out to see what was going on. I found that it was Bench who was standing in front of Camille outside the house, accusing her of being a girl of easy virtue because he had seen my car in their driveway. She slapped him hard with her flat hand and rushed to the front door. He was so surprised that he didn't start chasing her until a couple of seconds later, and she dashed past me into the house. I stopped Bench at the door, telling him, "Back off or you'll be leaving in an ambulance." To my surprise, he turned out to be a typical wife-beater, a coward who didn't dare challenge me and left without further comment. Camille thanked me for settling the matter without violence. She told me that he wanted her to stop their divorce, and when she refused to do so, he got angry and started calling her names. We decided to spend the weekend together in case he came back for more trouble. He didn't come back, and Camille, our kids, and I had a wonderful weekend together. Alexandra was due to give birth to our children the following week. When Camille asked me if I wanted to spend that week at her house instead of alone, I agreed because now I knew exactly what was going to happen. During my stay, Camille and I had developed a friendship very quickly. So quickly that some people in town wondered if we had had an affair before our relationship broke up. But the truth was that we had never met before. We ended up in the motel room where we caught our cheating spouses. We both knew how important this week was going to be for us, and I was determined not to waste any time. So I made her smile and offered to sleep in the same room. Which room exactly? Didn't matter. Camille looked me straight in the eye and asked, "Why?" "Because I hope we'll both enjoy it." "Is sleeping in the same room some kind of condition for you being here?" "No, of course not. I don't have any conditions. I don't mind sleeping in the same room, but only if you don't demand or expect anything other than sleeping there." "Deal." Of course, I expected and wanted something to happen, but only if Camille wanted what I wanted. So I was looking forward to our first night together, but I noticed she was a little tense, so I took my time. Camille offered to sleep in the master bedroom, and I had no objections. When her son was already asleep in his room, and it was time to go to bed, she went to the bathroom to get ready. I was about to undress and was standing in the bedroom in just my boxer briefs when she came out of the bathroom wearing a bright red knee-length nightgown. She was a gorgeous woman. I told her she was as beautiful as a dream, and she hugged me. I hugged her for a few more seconds, and when she made no attempt to pull free, I kissed her with a long kiss. She responded to my kiss and stayed in my arms. I whispered in her ear, "I love you," and kissed her again. She whispered in my ear, "Are you serious?" I replied that I was, and she didn't resist. She now dragged me to the bed, where she sat me down so that I was face to face with her. Then she turned off the light and whispered in my ear again, "Come here." It was then that I noticed Camille was crying, and I sobbed. "Are you proud of getting revenge on my ex? I love you and will only think about our future and not about cheating in the past. I really hope you love me, and that was the only reason to do what we did. Yes, I love you very much, but I was afraid you would use me for revenge. If your ex won't hurt you, I see no reason to worry about him, and I will never put obstacles in his way when he wants to see his son. What about us? My ex and I fought more than once over another child. What's your opinion? I dream of living together with you, and having a child would be a pleasure. I'm an old-fashioned woman who wants my child to have married parents." I immediately replied, "Do you want to marry me, Camille?" I knew that marrying a woman I barely knew was like playing Russian roulette, but I was in love with her, and such wonderful women of the right age are rare, and the fact that her marriage had failed through no fault of her own was in her favor. Camille put her arm around me and asked, "Are you serious? You hardly know me. I've never been so serious in my life. I love you, Camille." She immediately replied, "I love you too. Yes, I will marry you. Yes, I will, because it's the right thing to do. Even though it sounds wild to marry someone after such a short time together. Now we felt it was time to have tender sex again. The next morning, before we left for work, I told her that I wouldn't mind if the lawyer she works for did a background check on me to make sure I had never been involved in any shit in the past. Camille hugged me and said that my word was good enough for her, but her parents would probably look me over when they found out about our wedding plans. As for herself, she said she used drugs at parties in the days when she was wild but gave it all up when she got pregnant. Camille and Bench sold their house and I sold mine. Together we found a nice house with enough room for 4 kids. To everyone's delight, Camille and my daughters got along great with each other, and I with her son. Although we were a modern foster family, we were a happy family. Bench left our town, took a job as an assistant coach for a Division I women's soccer team, and apparently was very successful both in his job and on the field because, after a while, he shared an apartment with one of the prettiest girls on his now winning team. He didn't care much about his son, but he paid child support without any problems. I offered Camille to adopt him if we could get consent from his father. After we broke up, Alexandra lived alone most of the time. She dumped 2 suitors in a short time, living with each of them for only a month. She said it was my fault because she compared them to me and found neither of them capable of filling the void I left behind. Of course, that wasn't the only reason, and I'm sure she, as beautiful as she is, will find her Mr. Right very soon. Camille and I were married at City Hall the day after her divorce was finalized. She was already 3 months pregnant, and since it was her second wedding, she preferred not to make a big deal out of it, and I didn't care that I was marrying my favorite wife.